She was sent as a maid to the manor, but the widowed baron fell in love. The Employment Bureau in Des Moines had promised Clara it would be just a temporary job at a manor in the Midwest. What she didn't imagine was that her life would change completely when she stepped onto that property, where a grieving man was raising his infant of just a few months alone. Clara got off the donkey with the few bundles she carried, observing the imposing main house of Oakwood Manor. Major Richard Harrison appeared on the porch, awkwardly holding little Toby in his arms. The baby was crying non-stop, and the grey-haired man seemed completely lost in the face of that responsibility. "You must be the new worker the Bureau sent," he said without much interest, trying to calm the child. Clara nodded respectfully, but her eyes fixed on the squirming, restless baby. There was something wrong in the way the Major held him, too stiff, without the natural affection a child needed. "Yes, sir, Clara Brooks. I came to work as a maid," she replied, tying the donkey to a nearby post. The Major barely looked at her properly, clearly more concerned with Toby's persistent crying. Clara noticed the deep, dark circles on his face, the unshaven beard, the wrinkled shirt. That man was suffering, and not just from the loss of his wife. "Mrs. Martha will show you your duties. She is the housekeeper," he murmured, trying once more to rock the baby without success. It was then Clara heard heavy footsteps coming from the kitchen. A robust woman of about 50 appeared, drying her hands on her apron and observing the newcomer with evident disapproval. "Another one," grumbled Mrs. Martha, looking Clara up and down. "I hope this one lasts longer than the previous ones." The housekeeper's hostile tone did not go unnoticed, but Clara was used to harsh treatment. She had grown up in St. Jude's home until she was 16, then worked in several houses, always facing the contempt of those who thought themselves superior. "I will do my best," she said simply, picking up her bundles. The baby's crying intensified, and Clara saw desperation grow on the Major's face. He tried different positions, made faces to distract the child, but nothing worked. "Excuse me, sir." Clara approached hesitantly. "May I take a look? Perhaps he is hungry or needs changing." The Major stopped moving, surprised by the interruption. Mrs. Martha huffed indignantly. How presumptuous, a mere maid wanting to give advice about the boss's son. But the Major, exhausted, extended the baby to Clara. The moment she took him, Toby began to calm down. She positioned him more naturally, supporting his head well, and began to rock him gently. "He just needed to feel more secure," she murmured, and the baby finally stopped crying. The silence that followed was broken only by Toby's contented murmur, who now rested peacefully in Clara's arms. The Major watched her with an expression mixing surprise and relief. "How did you do that?" he asked, his voice laden with contained emotion. "I took care of many young children at the home," explained Clara, gently returning the baby. "They need to feel protected." Mrs. Martha cleared her throat loudly, clearly bothered by the scene. "Well, enough talk. Come with me, girl. There's a lot of work waiting." Clara followed the housekeeper inside the house, but noticed the Major remained on the porch, looking thoughtfully at his son, who now slept placidly in his arms. The inside of the house was even more imposing. Dark wood furniture, Persian rugs, family portraits on the walls. Mrs. Martha showed each room with evident pride, as if she owned it all. "This house has belonged to the Harrison family for 3 generations, she explained. As Major Richard inherited everything from his father, who was a highly respected man in the region. He married Mrs. Evelyn 2 years ago, but she made a dramatic pause. God rest her soul. Clara noticed the housekeeper was choosing her words carefully when speaking about the Major's late wife. "It must have been very hard for him," Clara commented sincerely. "Hard is an understatement," Mrs. Martha sighed. "The man is lost. He doesn't eat properly, barely sleeps, and with the boy. Poor child growing up without a mother." They reached the kitchen, a spacious room with a wood-burning stove and a large table in the center. There were stacked dishes, unwashed pots, clear signs of disarray. "Your duties," announced the housekeeper, "will be to clean the house, wash clothes, help in the kitchen, and take care of whatever else is needed. You wake at 5, sleep only after everything is ready. Sunday is your day off, but only after lunch. Clara nodded at each instruction. She was used to heavy routines. And pay attention, Mrs. Martha stepped closer, lowering her voice. No familiarity with the master. He is vulnerable now, but he is still a man of high society. You are just a maid. The message was delivered clearly and threateningly. Clara understood perfectly, but she didn't feel intimidated. She had no pretensions beyond working honestly. You can rest easy, she replied. I just want to do my job. Better that way. Mrs. Martha handed her a simple uniform. Put this on and start with the living room. The furniture is dusty. Clara changed in the small room assigned to her on the upper floor. It was simple, with a narrow bed, a dresser, and a window overlooking the fields. From that angle she could see the Major still on the porch, rocking his son. She began her work in the living room, carefully cleaning each piece of furniture. The photographs caught her attention. The Major as a young man, posing with his parents, another more recent one, beside a blonde, elegant woman who must have been Mrs. Evelyn. But in none of the couple's photos did she see genuine happiness in his eyes. Don't go fiddling with the photographs, Mrs. Martha's voice came from behind her. Just clean them and put them back. Sorry, Clara apologized, replacing the portrait on the table. Throughout the morning, she worked in silence, observing the household routine. The Major moved in and out of rooms, always carrying Toby, who cried frequently. With each episode, he grew more nervous, more lost. At lunchtime, Mrs. Martha prepared a simple meal. Clara ate in the kitchen, while the Major ate alone in the dining room. The baby was in the makeshift crib in the room, but soon began to cry again. This boy gives me no peace, murmured the Major, rising from the table. Clara saw him pick up Toby again, trying unsuccessfully to calm him. The child seemed increasingly agitated, and she realized he was probably hungry. Sir, Clara approached hesitantly, when was the last time he was fed? The Major stopped, thoughtful. I don't really know. Mrs. Martha prepared a bottle early this morning, but babies this age need to be fed every 3 hours, Clara explained gently, and perhaps he needs a change as well. Mrs. Martha appeared in the doorway, visibly annoyed. This again? Clara, return to your chores. But the Major raised his hand, indicating the housekeeper should be quiet. Go on, he asked Clara. I can prepare a bottle and see if he'll take it, she offered. Sometimes we need to test different temperatures. The Major nodded, passing the baby to her once more. Clara felt how Toby immediately relaxed in her arms, as if instinctively recognizing her gentle touch. In the kitchen, she warmed the milk carefully, testing the temperature on her wrist as she had learned at St. Jude's home. Toby accepted the bottle eagerly, confirming he was indeed famished. See, she murmured to the child, that's all you wanted. The Major watched her in silence, fascinated by the natural way she cared for his son. Mrs. Martha, for her part, was muttering something about maids who meddled where they weren't called. How did you learn so much about babies? Asked the Major when Toby finished feeding. At the orphanage where I grew up, the older children looked after the younger ones, explained Clara, putting the baby to burp. I learned out of necessity. And your family? I had no family. I was left on the orphanage doorstep as a baby. Clara's simple honesty seemed to touch something in the Major. He watched her for a long moment, as if truly seeing her for the first time. I'm sorry, he said, and there was sincerity in his voice. No need, Clara smiled. I had a good upbringing at the orphanage. The nuns taught me to read and write, and I learned many useful things. Mrs. Martha cleared her throat loudly, breaking the moment. If I may, the Major has commitments this afternoon. The meeting with the farm administrators cannot be postponed. The Major sighed, clearly reluctant to part from his son, who was finally calm. Mrs. Martha can look after him, suggested Clara. Or if needed, I can help after I finish the cleaning. That wouldn't be proper, the housekeeper interjected quickly. A maid caring for the master's son? What would people say? But the Major seemed to be considering the offer. Toby slept peacefully in Clara's arms, more relaxed than he had been in weeks. Perhaps, just for a few hours, he murmured. Mrs. Martha, you can supervise. The housekeeper opened her mouth to protest, but the Major's firm look made her reconsider. "As you wish," she grumbled. Clara spent the afternoon alternating between her household chores and caring for Toby. The child responded well to her presence, feeding at the right time, sleeping soundly when she rocked him. When the Major returned from the meeting at the end of the day, he found the house in order and his son resting peacefully in his crib. Mrs. Martha reported reluctantly that Clara had been efficient with both the cleaning and the child. "She does have a way with him," admitted the housekeeper, though clearly displeased. During dinner, the Major ate with more appetite than he had in weeks. The peace of mind from knowing Toby was well cared for left him more relaxed. "Clara," he called as she cleared the plates, "I'd like you to join me on the porch. I want to talk about Toby." Mrs. Martha raised her eyebrows but didn't dare comment. Clara followed the Major to the porch, where they sat in rocking chairs watching the sunset over the fields. "I don't know how to thank you," he began. "It's been weeks since Toby has been this calm." "He just needed attention," said Clara simply. "Babies sense when we're nervous." The Major sighed deeply. Since I lost my wife, everything has been so difficult. I didn't even know where to start with such a small child." Clara heard the genuine pain in his voice, but also noticed he didn't speak of his wife with the kind of longing she would expect from a devoted widower. "It must be very hard to raise a child alone," she commented gently. "It is. And it's not just the practical responsibility, it's everything. The loneliness, the feeling that I'm failing him every moment." There was a vulnerability in his voice that Clara didn't expect to hear from a man of his standing. She chose her words carefully. "You're not failing. Toby knows he is loved. That's the most important thing." The Major looked at her with gratitude. "How can you be so sure?" "Because I see how you look at him," Clara smiled. "The love is there. You just need to trust your instincts." They fell silent for a few moments, listening to the sounds of the manor at dusk. Clara felt strangely comfortable there, talking with this man who was supposed to be just her employer. "Clara," he finally said, "I'd like to make a proposal." She looked at him expectantly. "In addition to your normal duties, could you help specifically with Toby? Mrs. Martha would supervise, of course, but you clearly have a gift for it." Clara hesitated. The offer was tempting, but she remembered the housekeeper's warning about keeping her distance. "I'm not sure it would be appropriate," she said. "People might talk." "People always talk," replied the Major with a sad smile. "What matters is my son's well-being." "Then I accept," decided Clara. "I'll do my best." "I know you will." He stood up. "And Clara, you may call me Richard when we're talking about Toby. Let's dispense with some formalities. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. In the following days, Clara established a new routine. She rose at 5 to begin cleaning, but also managed Toby's schedule, ensuring he fed regularly and was changed whenever necessary. The baby flourished under her attentive care. Richard began to trust Clara more and more. He consulted her about Toby's habits, asked her opinion on the child's health, and gradually began to share the responsibilities of childcare with her. "You've transformed our routine," he commented one morning, watching Clara bathe Toby with skill and affection. "I don't know how we managed before." Richard was learning on your own," she corrected. "This is very difficult for anyone." Mrs. Martha watched this growing closeness with evident concern. She began making subtle comments about everyone's responsibilities in the house, always reminding Clara of her position. "Don't forget your main job is cleaning," she would say. "Looking after the child is just an extra help." But Clara sensed the housekeeper was more bothered by the attention Richard gave her than by hierarchical matters per se. One afternoon, as Clara was putting Toby down for a nap after lunch, Richard appeared in the child's room. "May I come in?" he asked softly. "Of course." She stepped away from the crib, where Toby was already fast asleep. Richard approached and watched his son for a few moments. There was a tenderness in his gaze that Clara found moving. "He's growing so fast," murmured Richard. "Sometimes I'm afraid I'll miss important moments." "You won't miss them," assured Clara. You're always here, always caring for him. But what about when I'm working in the fields or in meetings? I feel like time is passing too quickly. Clara understood that here was a father trying to balance responsibilities with the desire to be close to his son. It was a genuine and touching concern. Toby knows you always come back to him, she said. That's what matters. Richard looked at her with gratitude. You always know what to say, he remarked. How can you be so wise being so young? Clara smiled. I think life's hardships teach some lessons earlier. And here I thought I had faced hardships, Richard sighed. But you, growing up in a home, working from a young age, it must have been very difficult. It was, but it also taught me to value the good things when they appear. Clara looked at Toby, like caring for this beautiful child. There was something in Clara's sincere simplicity that touched Richard deeply. She didn't lament her past, didn't seek pity. She simply lived each day with gratitude and purpose. Clara, he said hesitantly, may I ask something personal? You may. Have you never thought of having your own family? Marrying, having children? The question caught her by surprise. Clara lowered her eyes, clearly touched by the subject. I've always thought about it, she admitted. But when you work as a maid, opportunities are few, and the men I've met, well, they weren't exactly suitable for starting a family. How so? They were men who saw me only as a temporary distraction, she explained with painful honesty. None would ever consider me for anything serious. Richard felt a pang of anger imagining Clara being treated with disrespect. Then they were fools, he said firmly. Clara looked at him, surprised by the intensity in his voice. Any man would be lucky to have you as a wife, Richard continued. You are kind, intelligent, caring. He stopped abruptly, realizing he might have said more than he should. An awkward silence settled between them. Thank you, murmured Clara, clearly moved by his words. I need to go check the crops. Richard headed hastily for the door. Toby is in good hands. Clara was left alone in the room, her heart beating fast. There was something in Richard's voice, in the intensity of his gaze, that made her feel things she shouldn't feel. That evening, during dinner, Richard was quieter than usual. Mrs. Martha noticed the tension in the air and took the opportunity to make comments about the need to maintain proper distances in the house. A well-run house is one where everyone knows their place, she declared, looking meaningfully at Clara. I fully agree, Richard replied curtly, and Clara's place is taking good care of my son, which she has been doing exemplarily. The housekeeper did not expect that response and was visibly displeased. Later, when Clara was finishing tidying the kitchen, Richard appeared. Clara, I apologize if I said something inappropriate today, he began. You said nothing inappropriate, she continued, organizing the dishes. You were just kind. Even so, I don't want you to feel uncomfortable here. Your work is important to me, to Toby. Clara stopped what she was doing and turned to him. I don't feel uncomfortable, she said honestly. I enjoy working here. I enjoy taking care of Toby. And I enjoy talking with you. Richard, he corrected. Richard, she repeated, smiling. A genuine connection was forming between them, something that went beyond the employer-employee relationship. Both felt it, but neither knew how to handle this reality. Good night, Clara, he finally said. Good night, Richard. He left the kitchen, but Clara stayed for a few moments, reflecting on the changes happening in her life. For the first time since she arrived at the manor, she felt that perhaps she had found a place where she truly belonged. The next morning, Clara woke earlier than usual. Toby had cried during the night, and she had heard him from her room. When she went down to start work, she found Richard in the kitchen, trying to prepare a bottle with evident difficulty. Let me help, she offered, naturally taking over the task. Thank you, he sighed with relief. He woke very early today, and I didn't want to bother you. It's no bother, Clara warmed the milk carefully. It's part of caring for babies. They don't follow our schedules. Richard watched her work efficiently, admiring not only her competence, but also the natural, caring way she treated Toby. Clara, he said impulsively. Have you ever thought about leaving here, looking for other work, perhaps in a bigger city? The question surprised her. She stopped stirring the milk and looked at him. Why? Have I done something wrong? No, on the contrary. He hurried to clarify. It's just that a person like you deserves more opportunities, a better life. Clara considered the question seriously before answering. I've worked in many places, she finally said. Houses in the city, other farms, but I've never felt so accepted as I do here. Accepted? Yes. In most places I was just labor. Here I feel my opinion matters, that I can make a difference in Toby's life. That's worth more than any higher salary. Richard felt his chest tighten with her honesty. Clara wasn't there just out of economic necessity. She genuinely cared for them. Still, he insisted, you shouldn't limit yourself. You have the potential for much more than being a maid. Like what? She asked with a sad smile. A woman like me with no family, no money, no formal education, my options are limited. You have an education, protested Richard. You speak well, you write, you have knowledge about many things. The nuns taught me the basics, Clara agreed, but that doesn't qualify me for better positions. I'm realistic about my place in the world. The resignation in her voice bothered Richard deeply. He saw there an intelligent and capable woman who had resigned herself to limitations imposed by the circumstances of her birth. Your place in the world doesn't have to be determined by where you were born, he said with conviction. Clara looked at him with surprise. There was an intensity in his voice she didn't fully understand. It's easy to say that when you're born with privileges, she replied gently without bitterness. But I've learned to find satisfaction in the small things. Taking care of Toby, for example. That makes me happy. Toby began to cry in the room, interrupting the conversation. Clara went to get him, and when she returned, Richard had gone out to begin work in the fields. During the following days, Richard seemed to be avoiding more personal conversations. He continued to trust Clara with Toby's care, but maintained a polite distance that she noticed and resented a little. Mrs. Martha, in turn, watched everything with growing attention. She began subtly questioning Clara about her conversations with the master, always under the pretext of protecting the house's reputation. The Major is a very respected man in the region, she would say. Any inappropriate behavior would be very damaging to him. There has been no inappropriate behavior, Clara would answer firmly. Of course not, Mrs. Martha would smile falsely, but appearances are important. It's best to avoid very long or intimate conversations with him. Clara began to feel constantly watched. The housekeeper seemed to appear whenever she and Richard were in the same room, creating an uncomfortable tension in the house. One afternoon, while Clara was nursing Toby in the living room, Richard entered and sat in a nearby armchair. They sat in silence for a few moments, just watching the child. He's growing so fast, Richard commented softly. Yes, he is, agreed Clara. He'll start crawling soon. And then walking, talking. Richard smiled. I'll need to run after him through the fields. It will be fun. Clara smiled too, imagining little Toby exploring the farm. Clara, Richard hesitated, may I ask a strange question? You may. Are you happy here? The question surprised her with its simplicity and sincerity. Yes, she answered honestly. I am happy here. Even though you're just a maid? Clara reflected on the question. It wasn't exactly about her position in the house, but about how she felt. I don't feel like just a maid, she explained. I feel useful, valued. Toby accepts me, you trust me. It's more than I had in many places. And if there were a possibility of not being a maid? He asked cautiously. How do you mean? Richard seemed to reconsider his words. Nothing. Forget it, he said quickly. I was just thinking out loud. But Clara noticed there was something important behind the question. She just didn't know what. That night, after Toby fell asleep, Clara was tidying the living room when she found Richard standing on the porch, looking at the fields under the moonlight. Sorry to bother you, she said. I just came to collect a few things. You never bother me, he turned to her. In fact, I was hoping you'd appear. Hoping? I wanted to apologize for the strange question today. It wasn't appropriate." "Why wasn't it appropriate?" asked Clara, moving closer to the porch door. Richard hesitated, clearly wrestling with something inside. Because it implies things it shouldn't imply," he finally said. "What kind of things?" "Clara." He turned fully to her. "Don't you see what's happening here?" Her heart raced. There was something in his voice, in the intensity of his gaze, that made her suspect, but she didn't dare believe. "I don't know what you're talking about," she murmured. Richard took a few steps toward her, stopping very close. "I'm falling in love with you," he said simply. The silence that followed was charged with emotion. Clara looked into his eyes, seeing a truth there that frightened and moved her at the same time. "Richard," she began. "I know it's impossible," he continued. "I know the differences between us are enormous, but I can't deny what I feel." Clara felt tears forming in her eyes. "You can't feel that," she whispered. "I'm just—" "Don't say you're just a maid," Richard interrupted. "You are so much more than that. To me, you are everything." The intensity of the declaration left her speechless. For weeks, she had felt something growing between them, but she never imagined he shared her feelings. "Richard," she shook her head, "even if I felt the same, and I do, this could never work." "Why not?" "Because you are a major, a landowner, a respected man. I'm an orphan with no family, no possessions. People would never accept it. I don't care about people. But you should care." Clara gently touched his face. "You have a son to raise, a reputation to uphold. I would never be accepted in your world." Richard took her hand, holding it against his face. "Then let's create our own world," he said. "It's not that simple." Clara withdrew her hand, taking a step back. I need to think." "Clara, don't run from me," Richard pleaded. "I'm not running." She wiped her tears. "I just need time to understand what this means." She left the porch quickly, leaving Richard alone with his turbulent thoughts. In the safety of her room, Clara sat on the bed, trying to process what had happened. Richard Harrison, a man who could have any woman in society, had confessed to being in love with her. It was a dream and a nightmare at the same time. A dream because she had also fallen in love with him, with the moments of tenderness they shared caring for Toby, with the gentle way he treated her. A nightmare because she knew such a relationship would be impossible in the society of the time. Downstairs, Richard paced the house, equally troubled. He had declared himself impulsively, but he didn't regret it. The feelings were real and deep, and for the first time since Evelyn's departure, he felt alive again. The difference was that with Evelyn, he had never experienced the emotional connection he had with Clara. His marriage had been arranged by their families, based on social and financial convenience. With Clara, everything was different, natural, true, based on mutual admiration and genuine affection. The next morning, Clara came down to the kitchen later than usual. Mrs. Martha was already preparing breakfast and greeted her with a suspicious look. "Did you sleep poorly?" asked the housekeeper. "A little," admitted Clara. "It wouldn't be because of any inappropriate conversations on the porch, would it?" Mrs. Martha stared directly at her. Clara froze. The housekeeper had witnessed the conversation from the previous night. "I don't know what you're talking about," she tried to deflect. "I heard voices last night," Mrs. Martha continued, "and I know when a conversation crosses appropriate boundaries." "Were you spying?" "I was protecting this house," the housekeeper retorted, "and I will continue to protect it, even if that means taking drastic measures." The threat was clear. Clara understood that Mrs. Martha would not hesitate to cause trouble if she deemed it necessary. "Nothing inappropriate happened," Clara said firmly. "It better stay that way." Mrs. Martha moved closer, threateningly, "because a word to the right people could destroy the Major's reputation, and you would be the first to be held responsible." Clara understood the message perfectly. Any involvement with Richard would be interpreted as her taking advantage, a maid seducing her vulnerable, widowed employer. During breakfast, Richard tried to talk normally with Clara, but she remained distant and formal. He noticed the change and grew concerned. "Clara, is everything all right?" he asked when they were alone. "Yes, sir," she replied formally. Sir? Richard noted the return to the formal address. Last night was a mistake, Clara interrupted. I apologize if I did or said anything that could have been misinterpreted. Misinterpreted? Richard was confused. Clara, you did nothing wrong. I was the one who... Please, she interrupted him again. It's best if we forget what happened and return to our proper roles. Richard fell silent for a moment, understanding that something had changed overnight. Clara was protecting herself, creating distance. If that's what you want, he said, hurt. It's what's best for everyone, she replied, avoiding his eyes. In the following days, Clara maintained a strict professional distance. She continued caring for Toby with the same affection, but avoided being alone with Richard, and answered his attempts at conversation with monosyllables. Richard tried to respect her decision, but the change left him frustrated and confused. The connection they had built seemed to have vanished overnight. Mrs. Martha observed the situation with evident satisfaction. She had succeeded in restoring what she considered the proper order in the house. One afternoon, while Clara was in the garden hanging laundry, Toby in a portable crib beside her, an elegant car arrived at the manor. Out of it stepped a well-dressed, middle-aged woman whom Clara did not know. Richard came out to greet the visitor, and Clara could hear fragments of the conversation. "Sarah, what a surprise!" exclaimed Richard. "Richard, darling," the woman kissed him on the cheek, "I came to see how you're managing, and to meet my nephew, of course." Clara understood this was Richard's sister. She had heard Mrs. Martha mention a sister who lived in the capital, but had never met her. "He's over there in the garden," Richard indicated. "Come, I'll introduce you to Toby." When the two approached, Clara stood up respectfully. "This is Clara, our domestic employee," Richard introduced, hesitating slightly on the definition. "Pleased to meet you," said Sarah, looking Clara up and down with evident disinterest. "Pleased to meet you, ma'am." Clara gave a small bow. Sarah went directly to the crib, picking Toby up carefully. "My goodness, Richard, how he's grown. He's beautiful," she exclaimed. Toby, who did not know his aunt, began to cry. Sarah tried to soothe him, but the child became even more agitated. "He's not used to strangers," Richard explained. "Clara," Sarah called imperiously, "calm this child." Clara hesitated, looking at Richard, who nodded. She picked Toby up, and immediately he stopped crying, relaxing in her familiar arms. "How does she do that?" asked Sarah, surprised. "Clara has a real way with him," explained Richard. "She takes care of Toby in addition to her other duties." Sarah observed the interaction between Clara and the baby with growing attention. There was something there that bothered her, though she couldn't quite define what it was. During dinner, Sarah dominated the conversation, talking about social life in the capital and asking questions about the management of the manor. Clara served the meal in silence, but noticed the visitor observing her discreetly. "Richard," said Sarah when Clara left to fetch dessert, "don't you think that girl is overly familiar with Toby?" "How so?" asked Richard, tense. "She picks him up with far too much familiarity. And from what I've observed, you allow her to make decisions about the child's care." "Clara is very competent," defended Richard. "Toby responds well to her care." "Even so," insisted Sarah, "you need to be careful. A young, pretty maid in the house with a widower. People might talk." "What people?" Richard was clearly irritated. "You know perfectly well what people. The local society, our friends, the family. Your name needs to be protected." Richard fell silent, but Clara, who had returned with the dessert, overheard part of the conversation. Her worst suspicions were confirmed. Even Richard's family saw problems with her presence there. After dinner, Sarah insisted on speaking privately with her brother. Clara went to the kitchen to wash the dishes, but fragments of conversation reached her. "Richard, I need to speak seriously with you," Sarah was saying. "This situation is not appropriate." "What situation?" asked Richard, though he knew exactly what she meant. "The way you treat this maid. I saw how you look at her, how you allow her to take liberties. This could become a scandal." "There is no scandal," protested Richard. "Clara is a competent employee who takes good care of my son." Richard, I wasn't born yesterday. Sarah lowered her voice. I can recognize when a man is interested in a woman. You're imagining things. Am I? Then why did you hesitate when you introduced her to me? Why do you allow her such intimacy with Toby? Why do you defend her so vehemently? Richard fell silent, unable to completely deny his sister's observations. Richard, continued Sarah, now in a gentler tone, I understand you're lonely. The loss of Evelyn was hard on all of us, but getting involved with a maid is not the solution. And what would the solution be? Asked Richard bitterly. Meeting suitable women from our society, who can be a true companion for you and an appropriate mother for Toby. Like Evelyn was. The question came out harsher than Richard intended. Sarah was silent for a moment. Richard's marriage to Evelyn had been troubled, something the whole family knew but preferred not to discuss. Evelyn had difficulties, admitted Sarah, but she was a woman of our class with a proper upbringing, and unhappy, and she made sure I knew it every day of our marriage. The confession surprised Sarah. Richard had never spoken openly about the marital problems. Even so, she insisted, you cannot get involved with a servant. Think of Toby. What future do you want for your son? I want him to grow up in a happy home, said Richard firmly, something I never had with Evelyn. And you think a maid with no family, no education, no means can give that to you? Clara has qualities that can't be bought with money or social position, defended Richard. Richard, listen to me. Sarah took her brother's arm. I know you're confused, but this can't go on. I'll stay here a few days to observe the situation better. In the kitchen, Clara finished washing the dishes with tears streaming down her face. Every word of the conversation confirmed her worst fears. No matter how much Richard claimed not to care about others' opinions, the reality was they lived in a society with rigid rules. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. The next morning, Sarah announced she would stay at the manor for a week to get to know Toby better and help Richard with some practical household matters. Mrs. Martha received the news with evident satisfaction, seeing an ally in her crusade to maintain proper distances. Clara immediately realized she was being watched. Sarah appeared constantly when she was caring for Toby, asking questions about her techniques, questioning her decisions, always in a polite but clearly investigative tone. Clara, said Sarah one afternoon, I'd like to know more about your previous experience. Richard mentioned you cared for children before. Yes, ma'am, replied Clara, keeping Toby occupied with a toy. At the orphanage where I grew up, and in a few homes where I worked. And why did you leave those previous homes? The question was asked casually, but Clara sensed the trap. Different reasons, she answered carefully. Sometimes the families no longer needed staff. Other times I was looking for better opportunities. I see, Sarah smiled coldly. And there was never trouble with the male employers in those houses. Clara's blood boiled, but she kept her composure. I have never had that kind of trouble, she said firmly. I have always maintained proper conduct. Of course, Sarah nodded. It's just that sometimes situations can be misinterpreted. Clara understood the insinuation perfectly. Sarah was suggesting she had a history of inappropriate involvements with employers. That evening, when Richard returned from work in the fields, Sarah was waiting for him in the parlor with a serious expression. Richard, we need to talk about Clara, she announced without preamble. What kind of talk? He asked, already suspecting his sister's intentions. I've made some inquiries about her past. What kind of inquiries? Richard grew irritated. I spoke with some people in town. Clara worked in at least 3 homes before coming here, and she left all of them under questionable circumstances. Richard felt his stomach tighten. What circumstances? In 2 of them, there were rumors of inappropriate behavior with the employers. In the 3rd, she was summarily dismissed after only 2 weeks. Rumors are just that, said Richard, though a bitter doubt began to grow in his chest. Richard, you need to face reality. Sarah took her brother's hands. This girl has a pattern of behavior. She gets close to widowed or vulnerable men, gains their trust, and then what? Interrupted Richard. then takes advantage of the situation for her own benefit. Richard fell silent, but Sarah saw she had planted the seed of doubt. Think, Richard, she continued. Clara arrived here as a simple maid. In a few months she's caring for your son, having intimate conversations with you, being treated almost like family. Don't you find that suspicious? She has never asked for anything for herself, Richard defended, but his voice sounded less certain. She hasn't asked yet, corrected Sarah. But that type of woman is patient. They build the situation gradually. Richard stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the dark fields. The doubt planted by Sarah troubled him more than he cared to admit. "What do you suggest I do?" he finally asked. "Fire her," said Sarah without hesitation, "before the situation becomes a bigger scandal. And Toby, he's used to her. Children adapt. And it's better to do this now than wait for the situation to become unbearable." Richard didn't answer, but Sarah saw she had managed to shake his trust in Clara. The next day, Richard's behavior changed noticeably. He avoided being alone with Clara, answered curtly to her questions about Toby, and treated her with a coldness she couldn't understand. "Did something happen to Toby?" asked Clara, worried about the sudden change. "No," Richard answered curtly without looking at her. "Did I do something wrong? Just carry on with your work." He left the kitchen abruptly. Clara was confused and hurt. After the declaration of love a few nights ago, Richard was acting as if she were a stranger. Mrs. Martha, sensing the tension, decided to take advantage of the situation. "Clara," she said when they were alone in the kitchen, "perhaps it would be best for you to look for another job." "Why?" asked Clara, alarmed. "Things are complicated." "Mrs. Sarah is not satisfied with some aspects of the household, and the Major seems to be reconsidering some decisions." Clara's heart sank. She understood she was being prepared for dismissal. "If I did something wrong, I can improve," she said desperately. "It's not a question of right or wrong," Mrs. Martha feigned pity. "It's a question of suitability." Clara spent the rest of the day in a state of shock. Everything she had built there, the affection for Toby, the feeling of belonging, her feelings for Richard, was crumbling. That night she decided to confront Richard. She waited until he went out to the porch after dinner and followed him. "Richard, I need to talk to you," she said, gathering all her courage. "Clara, I don't think it's appropriate—" "Please," she interrupted, "just listen to me for a few minutes." Richard hesitated, but nodded. "Mrs. Martha suggested I look for another job," Clara began. "And your sister, well, it's obvious she doesn't approve of me. But before I leave, I need to understand what changed." Richard remained silent, torn between what his heart said and the doubts planted by Sarah. "Perhaps it really is for the best," he finally said. "For all of us." "For the best?" Clara felt tears forming. "Richard, you told me you were falling in love with me. Was that a lie?" "It wasn't a lie," he sighed. "But perhaps it was a mistake." "Why a mistake?" She moved closer to him. "Why would true feelings be a mistake?" Because perhaps I don't know you as well as I thought." The sentence cut Clara like a stab. "What does that mean?" Richard struggled to find words that wouldn't hurt her even more, but couldn't. "It means perhaps you're not who I thought you were." Clara looked at him in shock, finally understanding the situation. "Your sister said something about me." It wasn't a question, it was a statement. Richard didn't deny it. "And you believed her without even giving me a chance to explain." "Clara, what did she say?" asked Clara firmly. "I have the right to know what I'm being accused of." Richard hesitated but decided to be honest. "That you have a pattern of behavior, that you became inappropriately involved with other employers, that you were fired for it." Clara was silent for a long moment, absorbing the accusation. "And you believe that?" she finally said. "I don't know what to believe anymore." Clara felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. The man who had said he was falling in love with her now doubted her character based on third-party gossip. "Very well," she said, recovering her dignity. "Then I'll make your decision easier. I'll leave tomorrow." Clara, it doesn't have to be so drastic. Yes, it does. She headed for the door. Because now I understand there was never real trust between us. And without trust, there is no foundation for any relationship. Clara, wait. But she had already entered the house, leaving Richard alone with his doubts and the growing feeling that he had made a terrible mistake. The next morning, Clara came down with her bundles packed. She had spent the night organizing her few possessions and trying to hold back tears. Toby was in the parlor cradle, and when he saw her, he reached out his little arms to her. Clara held him one last time, kissing his forehead tenderly. "Goodbye, my little one," she whispered. "Be happy." Richard appeared in the parlor at that moment and saw the scene. His heart tightened as he perceived Clara's genuine pain at saying goodbye to Toby. "Clara," he began, "there's nothing more to say." She placed Toby back in the cradle, avoiding Richard's gaze. "I've taken care of all the instructions about Toby. Mrs. Martha knows his routine." "Where are you going?" "That is no longer your concern," she replied coldly. Sarah appeared at that moment, watching the scene with poorly disguised satisfaction. "Well, Clara," she said with false courtesy, "I wish you luck in your future employments." Clara looked her directly in the eyes. "Thank you very much, Ma'am, and thank you for teaching me a valuable lesson about how people can destroy each other with gossip and insinuations." "How dare you—" "Sarah," interrupted Richard, a clear warning in his voice. Clara walked to the door where she had left her bundles. Richard followed her. "Clara, at least tell me where you're going, so I know you're safe." She looked at him one last time, and he saw there not anger, but a deep sadness that shook him. "After today, Richard, you have lost the right to worry about me," she said simply. "Please, don't say that." "I say it because it's true." Clara picked up her bundles. "You chose to believe strangers instead of trusting me. That choice has consequences." Richard watched Clara walk away down the dirt road, carrying her possessions on the donkey. With each step she took, the weight in his chest grew heavier. Sarah approached him. "You did the right thing," she said. "I know it's difficult now, but in the future, you'll be grateful." Richard didn't answer, but for the first time since Sarah had arrived, he seriously questioned whether he had made the correct decision. In the days that followed, the house sank into a gloomy routine. Toby, accustomed to Clara's loving care, became fussy and difficult. Mrs. Martha tried to care for him, but she didn't have Clara's patience or skill. Richard became even more withdrawn. He worked long hours in the fields, as if trying to forget the sadness consuming him. But whenever he returned home and heard Toby crying, he remembered how Clara could soothe him so easily. Sarah stayed a few more days, satisfied with the outcome of her intervention, but even she began to notice that the house had lost something indefinable with Clara's departure. "Toby is so restless," she commented to Richard one evening. "He is," he agreed curtly. "Perhaps we need to find someone else to care for him, someone more experienced." "Perhaps." Sarah noticed Richard wasn't interested in the conversation. In fact, he had barely spoken since Clara left. "Richard, you need to move on," she said. It was the right decision. Richard finally looked at her. "Was it?" he asked. "Because I don't feel as if I've done the right thing." "It's natural to have doubts," Sarah tried to console him. "But imagine if you had married her. The scandal, the gossip, the harm to Toby." "What harm?" interrupted Richard. "Toby loved Clara. She cared for him like a mother." "A proper mother, Richard, not an opportunistic maid." Richard fell silent, but his sister's words did not console him as they once had. Meanwhile, Clara had managed to find work at a smaller farm, about 50 kilometers away. The pay was lower, the conditions worse, but at least she was far from the painful memories. But no matter how hard she tried to focus on the new job, she couldn't stop thinking about Toby. She worried if he was eating properly, if anyone rocked him when he cried, if he felt her absence. And despite the hurt, she also missed Richard. Their conversations on the porch, the moments when they cared for Toby together, the genuine connection they had built. 1 week after Clara's departure, Sarah decided to return to the city. "I'm sure you'll be fine," she said, as she said goodbye to Richard. "You'll soon find someone more suitable." "Of course," Richard agreed mechanically. "And Richard," she hesitated, "if that woman tries to come back, don't allow it. That sort of person always tries to return when they think you're vulnerable." Richard nodded, but there was no conviction in his gesture. After his sister's departure, the house grew even quieter. Martha tried to maintain the routine, but it was obvious she was overwhelmed. Toby cried constantly, refused his food, and slept poorly. One night, when Toby was particularly restless, Richard picked him up and walked through the house, trying to soothe him. He passed through the kitchen where Clara used to prepare the bottles with such care. He passed the porch where they'd had their most intimate conversations. "We miss her, don't we, son?" he murmured to Toby. As if he understood, Toby stopped crying for a moment and looked at his father with his big dark eyes. "Daddy was a fool," Richard confessed, "a fool who let doubts destroy something good." It was at that moment that Richard made a decision. The next morning, he would ride into town to personally investigate the accusations Sarah had made against Clara. The family lawyer, Dr. Arthur Mitchell, received Richard in his office with surprise. "Richard, good to see you. How is Toby?" "Well, doctor, thank you. I'm here on a personal matter." "Tell me," Richard hesitated, feeling a bit ridiculous. "I need you to investigate the past of a former employee of mine, Clara Brooks." Dr. Arthur raised his eyebrows. "What kind of investigation?" "My sister claims she had problems in previous jobs, inappropriate behavior. I want to know the truth." "I see." Dr. Arthur made some notes. "I can make some discreet inquiries. It will take a few days." "That's fine. I'll wait." For the next 3 days, Richard anxiously awaited the results of the investigation. Toby remained restless, and he himself could barely concentrate on work. Finally, Dr. Arthur sent word that he had information. "Richard," said the lawyer when they met, "I investigated Clara Brooks's past, and the information is interesting." "Go on." "She worked in 3 households before yours, that's true. But the reasons for leaving were not what your sister suggested." Richard felt his heart speed up. "In the first house, Doctor," Arthur continued, "she was dismissed because she defended a younger maid who was being abused by the employer's son. In the second, she left because the employer tried to take advantage of her, and she refused. In the third, she was let go after 2 weeks because she questioned the treatment given to a sick child." Richard felt as if he'd been punched in the stomach. "You're saying that?" "I'm saying that Clara Brooks has a history of moral integrity, not inappropriate behavior. The information your sister obtained was distorted or misinterpreted." Richard closed his eyes, feeling the weight of his mistake. "How did she find this out?" he asked. "I spoke with some of the people your sister contacted. It seems she asked questions in a leading way, seeking confirmation for suspicions she already had." "So she was looking for trouble?" "Exactly." Richard left the lawyer's office in a state of shock. He had committed a terrible injustice against Clara, based on information manipulated by his own sister. Immediately he began planning how to fix his mistake. First, he needed to find Clara and apologize. Then, if she allowed it, he wanted to bring her back. The farm where Clara worked wasn't too far away, but Richard decided to prepare properly for the meeting. It wouldn't be easy to convince her to forgive him after the humiliation she had suffered. The next morning, Richard rode toward the farm where Clara worked. His heart raced with nervousness and anticipation. He arrived around noon. It was a smaller and simpler property than his, with a modest main house and facilities in need of repair. A middle-aged man came out to greet him. "Good morning, can I help you?" he asked courteously. "Good morning. My name is Richard Harrison. I'm looking for Clara Brooks, who I believe works here." The man, who introduced himself as Mr. Silas, the farm's owner, looked at him curiously. "Clara? Yes, she works here. But may I ask why you're looking for her?" "She worked on my farm previously. There are some unresolved matters I need to settle with her." Mr. Silas seemed hesitant. "Unresolved matters?" he repeated suspiciously. Richard realized his answer had sounded threatening. "Nothing negative," he clarified quickly. just personal matters that were left unsettled. Well, she's working in the house right now, but perhaps it's best if I ask if she wants to see you. I understand. Please tell her Richard is here and would like to talk if she allows it. Mr. Silas nodded and headed to the house. Richard waited, mentally rehearsing what he would say to Clara. A few minutes later, Mr. Silas returned. Clara said she does not wish to speak with you, he informed him, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Richard felt his heart sink, but he didn't give up. Please tell her I discovered the truth about her past, that I know I was unfair and that I need to apologize. Mr. Silas hesitated, but agreed to take the message. This time the wait was longer. Richard began to fear Clara wouldn't change her mind. Finally, she appeared on the house's porch. Even from a distance, Richard could see she was thinner, with a tired expression she didn't have before. Clara came down the steps and walked to where Richard waited. She kept a safe distance and a defensive posture. "Richard," she said coldly, "Mr. Silas said you discovered the truth about my past." "What truth?" "The truth that you were slandered," replied Richard, "that your sister twisted information to make me believe you were opportunistic." Clara looked at him silently for a long moment. "And why should it matter now what you discovered?" she finally asked. "Because I committed a terrible injustice against you, and because I need you to know that I deeply regret it." "You regret?" repeated Clara without emotion. "Very convenient to regret now. Clara, please, I know I was wrong. I know I should have trusted you from the start." "You should have," she agreed. "But you didn't. You preferred to believe gossip and insinuations." Richard lowered his head, ashamed. "You're right, I have no excuses for my behavior." "You certainly don't." Clara crossed her arms. "So why are you here?" "Because I want to do what's right. I want to ask for your forgiveness and if you allow it, I want you to come back." "Come back?" Clara laughed bitterly. "Come back for what? To be humiliated again when your family decides they don't approve of me?" "It wouldn't be like that," protested Richard. "Things would be different." "How different?" challenged Clara. "Did you change social classes? Did I gain a respectable family? Did the world change its rules about relationships between employers and maids?" Richard fell silent, realizing Clara was right. The practical obstacles still existed. "Clara," he said finally, "I love you, that hasn't changed." "Perhaps not," she replied. "But love without trust is worthless. And trust, once broken, is very hard to rebuild." "I'm willing to try," Richard said desperately. "Please, give me a chance." Clara looked at him for a long moment, and Richard saw tears forming in her eyes. "Richard," she said softly, "even if I wanted to come back, how would it work? Your family doesn't accept me. Society wouldn't accept us. And I couldn't bear to go through another humiliation like that." "We'll find a way," insisted Richard. "If we truly love each other, we'll find a way." "Love doesn't solve everything," Clara shook her head. "I learned that in the most painful way possible." "And Toby?" asked Richard, playing his last card. "He misses you. He cries constantly, refuses food, barely sleeps." Clara's tears finally streamed down her face. "It's not fair to use Toby against me," she whispered. "I'm not using him." Richard cautiously stepped closer. "I'm telling the truth. We both miss you. The house isn't the same without you." Clara closed her eyes, fighting the emotion. "Richard, I need to think. This is all very confusing." "How much time do you need?" "I don't know." She dried her tears. "Perhaps it's best if you go now." Richard wanted to protest, but realized pressuring Clara wasn't the right strategy. "All right," he agreed. "But Clara, please consider coming back, not as a maid, but as a member of the family, as the person we love." Clara didn't respond, but Richard saw his words had touched her. "I'll wait," he said, "for as long as it takes." Richard mounted his horse and left, leaving Clara with turbulent thoughts and a heart divided between love and the fear of being hurt again. In the following days, Clara couldn't concentrate on her work. The conversation with Richard had stirred up all the feelings she tried to suppress. Mr. Silas, who had witnessed part of the conversation, was understanding. "I may not understand the whole situation," he said to Clara, "but it's obvious you both care for each other." "It's not that simple," sighed Clara. "Love rarely is simple," smiled Mr. Silas, "but it's also not something you find easily." Clara knew he was right. Despite all the pain, she couldn't deny she loved Richard and Toby. The question was whether she had the courage to risk her heart again. Meanwhile, at Oakwood Manor, Richard tried to deal with the routine without Clara. Toby remained difficult, and Mrs. Martha was visibly overwhelmed. "Major," she said one morning, "I need to be honest. I'm not managing to handle everything. Toby needs more specialized care." Richard knew she was right. He himself was exhausted from trying to balance work with the constant care Toby required. "Perhaps we should hire someone else," suggested Mrs. Martha, "someone with experience in childcare." "Perhaps," agreed Richard, but his heart wasn't in the conversation. The truth was that no one could replace Clara, not just for the technical care of Toby, but for the loving way she treated the child, the infinite patience, the genuine love. 1 week after Richard's visit, Clara finally made a decision. She asked for a private conversation with Mr. Silas. "I need to leave," she announced. "There's a situation I need to resolve." "With the man who was here?" asked Mr. Silas. "Yes, Richard Harrison. I worked at his farm before coming here." "And you love him?" It wasn't a question. Clara nodded, unable to deny it. "And he loves her too," continued Mr. Silas. "He says so, but the circumstances are complicated." "Life is always complicated," smiled Mr. Silas. "The question is whether it's worth fighting for what makes us happy." "And what if it goes wrong? What if I get hurt again?" "And what if it goes right?" retorted Mr. Silas. "What if you lose the chance to be happy out of fear?" Clara reflected on his words all night. The next morning she packed her bags and said goodbye to the Silases, who wished her luck. The trip back to Oakwood Manor took half a day. The whole way, Clara rehearsed what she would say to Richard. She was still hurt by his distrust, but she also recognized that everyone makes mistakes. When she arrived at the manor late in the morning, she found unusual activity. There was a car parked in front of the main house, and she could hear raised voices coming from inside. Clara tied up the donkey and approached the house carefully. The voices became clearer. Richard was arguing with someone, and there was also the voice of a woman she didn't recognize. "It can't be a coincidence," said the woman's voice. "First that troublesome maid, now this whole story." "I won't discuss this again, Sarah," replied Richard firmly. Sarah was back. Clara felt her stomach tighten. If Richard's sister-in-law had returned, it meant new problems were arising. She decided to wait outside until the argument ended. But the desperate crying of Toby reached her ears, and all her maternal instincts kicked in. Without thinking of the consequences, Clara entered the house. The scene she found alarmed her. Toby was in the arms of an unknown woman, crying inconsolably. The woman, visibly irritated, was trying to calm him without success. Richard was standing nearby, with a desperate expression. "What is happening here?" asked Clara, completely forgetting formalities. Everyone turned to her. Richard showed surprise and relief simultaneously. Sarah stared at her with evident anger. The unknown woman just seemed confused. "Clara," exclaimed Richard, "you came back." "I heard Toby crying," she explained, addressing the woman holding the child directly. "Can I help?" "And who are you?" asked the woman sharply. "She's the former maid," replied Sarah in a venomous tone. "The one who caused all the problems." "Sarah," warned Richard. Clara ignored the comments and held out her arms for Toby, who immediately leaned toward her. The child had recognized her and wanted to go to her familiar arms. "May I take Toby?" Clara asked the woman gently. "I don't think that's appropriate," interfered Sarah. "Mrs. Eleanor is a qualified professional." "A qualified professional who isn't managing to calm the child," observed Clara. Mrs. Eleanor, clearly frustrated with Toby's persistent crying, handed him to Clara without protest. Instantly, Toby stopped crying. He snuggled against Clara as if he had found a safe harbor, and his sobs gradually turned into quiet sighs. The silence that followed was loaded with meaning. It was impossible to deny the natural connection between Clara and the child. "How does she do that?" murmured Mrs. Eleanor, impressed. "That's exactly the question I've been asking," replied Richard, looking at Clara with gratitude and something more. "This is ridiculous," exploded Sarah. "Richard, you can't allow this person back here." "This person," said Richard firmly, "has a name, and she's demonstrating more competence in 5 minutes than we've managed in days." Clara was gently rocking Toby, who now slept peacefully in her arms. She had missed that small, familiar weight, the baby smell, the total trust Toby placed in her. "Toby, my little one," she murmured softly. "How you've grown." "Clara?" said Richard softly. "Can we talk?" "Not now," Sarah interfered. "Eleanor, we need to discuss the terms of your contract." "What contract?" asked Clara. "Mrs. Eleanor is a governess specialized in childcare," explained Mrs. Martha, who had appeared in the room. "She came from Chicago to care for Toby." Clara felt a stab of jealousy, but tried not to show it. "I see," she said simply. "Actually," interjected Mrs. Eleanor, "I don't think I'll be needed here." "What do you mean?" asked Sarah, alarmed. "It's obvious the child has a special bond with this young lady," Mrs. Eleanor indicated Clara. "In 10 years of profession, I've never seen a child calm down so quickly. It would be my mistake to try to replace that." "But your scientific methods, your training," protested Sarah. "They don't make up for the lack of emotional connection," said Mrs. Eleanor honestly. "This child needs the person he loves, not professional techniques." Sarah looked visibly frustrated, realizing her plan to hire a proper governess had failed. "Mrs. Eleanor," said Richard, "I thank you for your honesty. Of course I'll pay for the inconvenience of the trip." "That won't be necessary." Mrs. Eleanor picked up her bag. "Just do what's best for this child." After the governess left, only Richard, Clara, Sarah, and Mrs. Martha remained in the room. Toby continued sleeping peacefully in Clara's arms. "Well," said Sarah sarcastically, "it seems your strategy worked. Coming back right when we needed someone to care for Toby." "It wasn't a strategy," replied Clara calmly. "I came here to talk to Richard. I didn't know about the situation with Toby." "How convenient." "Sarah, that's enough," said Richard firmly. "Clara, can we talk on the porch?" Clara hesitated, looking at Toby in her arms. "Can I bring Toby? I don't want to wake him." "Of course." They went out to the porch, leaving Sarah clearly irritated. Clara sat carefully in the rocking chair, keeping Toby in her arms. "Thank you for coming," said Richard, sitting beside her. "I still don't know if it was the right decision," admitted Clara. "I know it was." Richard looked at her intensely. "Clara, these have been the worst days of my life, not just because of the difficulty with Toby, but because of the awareness of the mistake I made." "Richard." "Please let me finish," he asked. "I discovered the truth about your past. I discovered that my sister manipulated information to make me distrust you. And I discovered that I'm a fool who almost lost the best thing that ever happened to me." Clara stayed silent, gently rocking Toby. "I can't undo what I did," continued Richard, "but I can promise I would never doubt you again, that I would face any opposition to defend you." "Even the opposition of your family?" "Especially the opposition of my family," he answered with conviction. Clara looked at him, seeing sincerity in his eyes. "Richard, I also made a mistake," she admitted. "What do you mean?" "I ran away instead of fighting. When your sister made the insinuations, when you showed doubts, I simply resigned myself and left. Perhaps if I had stayed and insisted on my innocence—" "No," Richard shook his head. "You shouldn't have had to prove your innocence. I should have trusted you from the start." "Still, I ran away out of pride," Clara sighed. "And in the process I abandoned Toby when he needed me. As if feeling he was being mentioned, Toby stirred slightly in her arms but kept sleeping." "Clara," said Richard softly, "would you come back? Not as a maid, but as my wife." The question caught her completely by surprise. "Your wife?" she whispered. I know it's complicated. I know there will be opposition, scandal, difficulties. But I also know that I love you, that you love Toby as if he were your own son, and that together we can be happy. Clara felt tears forming in her eyes. Richard, you cannot be serious. Marriage between us would be... It would be what our hearts want, he interrupted. Clara, I don't care about social conventions. I want to build a real family with you. And your sister, and Mrs. Martha, and all the others who will disapprove. Let them disapprove, said Richard firmly. My life, my son, my happiness are more important than others' approval. Clara looked into his eyes, seeing a determination she hadn't seen before. Are you sure about this? She asked. Because once we were married, there would be no turning back. You would have to live with the consequences forever. The only consequences I care about are being happy with you and giving Toby the mother he deserves. Clara was silent for a long moment, reflecting on the proposal. It was everything her heart desired, but her mind still feared the practical difficulties. What if Toby doesn't accept me as his mother? She asked. Richard smiled, looking at his son, sleeping peacefully in Clara's arms. I think he already accepts you, he said. In fact, I think he loves you as much as I do. Clara looked at Toby, feeling a wave of maternal love. That child already occupied a special place in her heart. Clara, Richard gently took her free hand. I can't promise it will be easy, but I can promise I will fight for us every day, that I will defend you against any criticism, that we will build a life based on love, not conventions. And if I say yes? Clara asked softly. What happens next? Then we get married as soon as possible. We make Toby officially your son, and we begin our life as a family. Clara closed her eyes, making the most important decision of her life. Yes, she finally said. I will marry you. Richard felt a wave of relief and joy. He leaned in and kissed Clara gently, sealing the promise. Toby chose that moment to wake up, opening his eyes and smiling upon seeing Clara. As if approving the adult's decision, he reached a tiny hand toward her face. Welcome to our family, murmured Clara, kissing Toby's forehead. From inside the house they could hear Sarah talking heatedly with Mrs. Martha. It was obvious they would not approve of the decision, but Richard was determined to face any opposition. I need to tell them, he said, indicating the house. Do you want me to come with you? No, it's better I speak alone first. Richard stood up. You stay here with Toby. It's where you both belong. Richard entered the house, where he found Sarah and Mrs. Martha conspiring in the living room. Sarah, Mrs. Martha, he announced, I have something important to communicate. If it's about that woman, began Sarah, I hope you've come to the sensible conclusion that... I am going to marry Clara, interrupted Richard. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah stared at him as if he had lost his mind. You cannot be serious, she finally said. I am completely serious. Richard, Mrs. Martha approached, you are emotional because of the situation with Toby. You cannot make such a drastic decision. It is not an emotional decision. Richard kept his tone firm. It is a decision based on love and what is best for my family. Your family, Sarah exploded. Richard, are you thinking of Toby, of his future, of what people will say? I'm thinking of giving Toby a mother who truly loves him and of building a home where he can grow up happy. With a maid? Sarah couldn't believe it. With an extraordinary woman who happens to have been born in humble circumstances, corrected Richard. Clara has more genuine qualities than most women in our society. Richard, you are making a mistake you will regret for the rest of your life, insisted Sarah. The only mistake I regret is having doubted her, replied Richard, and I will not make that mistake again. And our family, our reputation, what will our friends think? Sarah. Richard approached his sister. I understand your concern. I know this is hard to accept, but my decision is made. So you are choosing a maid over your own family? Asked Sarah, hurt. I am choosing love over prejudice, replied Richard, and I hope one day you will understand. Sarah picked up her purse and headed for the door. When you tire of this madness and want to return to reality, I will be in the capital, she said coldly. But do not count on me to support this scandal. Sarah, you will always be my sister, said Richard sadly. But I will not allow your opinions to control my life. Sarah left, slamming the door. Mrs. Martha stayed for a few moments, visibly torn. Major, she said finally, I have worked in this house for many years. I saw you grow up, I saw your parents. They would be horrified by this decision. My parents married for convenience and were unhappy their whole lives, replied Richard. I do not want that for myself or for Toby. Even so, Mrs. Martha, I respect your opinion, but Clara will be my wife and the lady of the house. I hope you can accept that and continue working here. Mrs. Martha hesitated, clearly conflicted. I need to think, she said finally. I understand. But remember that Clara has always treated you with respect, and I hope you will do the same. Richard returned to the porch, where he found Clara still rocking Toby, who was now awake and playing with a lock of her hair. How did it go? Asked Clara. As expected, Richard sighed. Sarah left furious. Mrs. Martha is shocked. Richard, perhaps we should reconsider. No, he sat down beside her. Clara, I knew there would be resistance, but I will not give up on us because of others' opinions, even if it means breaking with your family. My real family is you and Toby, said Richard, gently touching his son's face. The rest are just relatives. Clara was moved by his determination, but there were still practical concerns. Richard, what if we marry and then you regret it? What if the social pressure is too much? Clara, look at me, asked Richard. Do you think I am making this decision lightly? She looked into his eyes and saw a resolve there that reassured her. No, she answered honestly. Then trust me, as I should have trusted from the start. Clara nodded, feeling a peace she had not experienced in weeks. When will we marry? She asked. As soon as possible, smiled Richard. I do not want to give time for more outside interference. Toby chose that moment to babble something that sounded vaguely like "Mama," looking at Clara. Both were moved by the moment. He knows, whispered Clara. He knows we are a family. He does, agreed Richard, kissing his son's forehead, and we are finally going to make it official. In the following days, Richard handled the wedding preparations. He decided to hold a simple ceremony in the farm's chapel, with only the necessary witnesses. Clara initially resisted the idea of such a quick wedding, but Toby convinced her definitively. The child had become even more attached to her, crying when she walked away and smiling radiantly when she appeared. He already considers you his mother, observed Richard one morning, seeing Toby reach out his arms to Clara as soon as he saw her. And I consider him my son, admitted Clara, picking up the child in her arms. Mrs. Martha, after a few days of reflection, decided to stay at the manor. Although she still had reservations about the union, she could not deny that Clara took good care of Toby and treated everyone with respect. I don't completely approve, she said to Richard, but I acknowledge that Clara is a good person, and Toby needs her. Thank you, Mrs. Martha. Your support means a lot. It's not exactly support, she corrected. It's acceptance of reality. Richard decided not to invite Sarah to the wedding, knowing she would only cause trouble. Instead, he sent a letter explaining his decision and asking for understanding. Sarah's reply was short and harsh. She did not bless the union and wanted no involvement with this farce. Richard was hurt but not surprised. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we are just starting out. Now, continuing. On the eve of the wedding, Clara stayed up all night, a mix of excitement and nerves. The next morning she would be the wife of Richard Harrison, mother to Toby, lady of a manor. It was a transformation that still seemed surreal. Mrs. Martha had discreetly offered her own mother's wedding dress, a simple but elegant piece. Clara was touched by the gesture, seeing it as a first sign of acceptance. You look beautiful, said Mrs. Martha, when Clara came down the stairs, dressed for the ceremony. Thank you, Clara smiled nervously. And thank you for the dress. It means a lot to me." "It's only right," Mrs. Martha replied simply. Richard waited for her in the chapel, with Toby in his arms and the two witnesses, the lawyer, Dr. Arthur, and his wife. The town priest had agreed to perform the ceremony, though he had made some remarks about the unusual nature of the union. When Clara entered the chapel, Richard felt his heart race. She was radiant, carrying a small bouquet of wildflowers she had picked in the manor gardens. Toby, seeing Clara in her wedding dress, laughed and reached his little arms out to her. The moment touched everyone present, including the priest, who smiled tenderly. "My friends," the priest began, "we are here to join Richard and Clara in marriage, a union that, while it may seem unusual to some, is clearly based on true love." During the vows, Richard spoke emotionally about second chances and finding love where you least expect it. Clara promised to love and care for Richard and Toby as her own family. When the priest declared them husband and wife, Richard kissed Clara gently, while Toby clapped his little hands, as if understanding the importance of the moment. "Welcome to the Harrison family," Richard whispered in Clara's ear. "Thank you for accepting me into it," she replied, with tears of happiness. The wedding lunch was simple, served in the manor's dining room. Dr. Arthur made a discreet toast to the couple, wishing them happiness despite the adversities they might face. "Richard and Clara," he said, "you are showing that true love overcomes any social convention. May you be happy." After the guests left, Richard, Clara, and Toby were alone as a family for the first time. It was a strange and wonderful moment all at once. "I don't know how to be a farmer's wife," confessed Clara, still in her wedding dress. "And I don't know how to be a real husband," laughed Richard. "We'll learn together." Toby, who had dozed off during lunch, woke up and looked at the two of them curiously, as if sensing something had changed. "Hi, my love," said Clara, taking him into her arms. "Now I'm officially your mummy." "And I'm officially the luckiest man in the world," added Richard, embracing his new family. In the following weeks, Clara gradually adapted to her role as the lady of the house. It was a huge change, from maid to mistress, but she maintained her simplicity and natural kindness. The farm workers, initially confused by the situation, soon came to respect her. Clara treated them with fairness and consideration, never forgetting her humble origins. "The new mistress is good people," the foreman commented to the other workers. "She hasn't forgotten where she came from." Toby flourished under Clara's care. The child gained weight, slept well, and developed quickly. His constant laughter filled the house with joy. Richard watched his family's transformation with deep gratitude. The house, once silent and melancholy, now lived with positive energy. "You brought life here," he said to Clara one evening, as they watched Toby play on the living room rug. "We brought life," Clara corrected. "We're a real family now." Of course, not everything was roses. Some neighbors made malicious comments about the Major's unsuitable marriage. Clara sometimes overheard fragments of gossip when she went to town, but Richard taught her to ignore it. "What matters is what we have here inside," he would say. "The rest is just noise." The greatest trial came a few months after the wedding, when Sarah unexpectedly returned to the farm. Clara was in the garden with Toby when she saw the family car approaching. Her stomach tightened with nervousness. "Richard," she called, entering the house. He came out of the study and saw his sister approaching through the window. "She probably came to try to convince us we made a mistake," he said. "Let's face her together." Sarah got out of the car with a serious expression, but Clara noticed she seemed less hostile than the last time. "Richard," she greeted coldly, then looked at Clara. "Clara." "Sarah," Richard replied. "To what do we owe the visit?" "I came to check on how things are," she said, clearly uncomfortable. "Things are well," Richard answered. "Very well, actually." Sarah discreetly observed Clara, who was holding Toby in her arms. The child was visibly healthy and happy, smiling and babbling contentedly. "Toby is different," Sarah commented. "He's growing up happy," Clara said simply. "May I hold him?" Clara hesitated for a moment, then handed Toby to his aunt. The child didn't protest, but clearly preferred Clara's arms. He's grown so much, Sarah observed, and he seems content. He is content, Richard agreed. We have been happy. Sarah was silent for a few moments, watching Toby try to reach for her necklace. Richard, she finally said, may I speak with you privately? Richard looked at Clara, who nodded. Of course. Clara, could you take Toby to the garden? Clara took Toby back and discreetly left. Sarah waited until they were alone. I came here determined to keep fighting with you, she admitted. But seeing Toby like this, seeing how Clara treats him— Go on, Richard encouraged. Perhaps I was hasty in my judgment. Richard was surprised by the admission. What changed your mind? I spoke with some people in the capital, people who knew Clara from previous jobs. The stories I heard don't match the information I had. Richard understood that Sarah had investigated more deeply and discovered the truth. And what did you find? That Clara has a reputation for honesty and integrity, that she was dismissed from jobs for defending other people, not for inappropriate behavior, that I was unfair. Sarah. No, let me finish, she raised her hand. I was unfair, prejudiced, and I almost destroyed your happiness because of my own biases. Richard remained silent, watching his sister struggle with her own admission of error. Can you forgive me? She asked. And can you ask Clara if she will forgive me too? Of course I can forgive you, said Richard, but as for Clara, you'll have to ask her personally. Sarah nodded, gathering courage. May I call her? Richard went to get Clara from the garden. She returned hesitantly, clearly nervous about what Sarah might want. Clara, Sarah began, I need to apologize. I was unfair, prejudiced, and caused unnecessary pain to you and to Richard. Clara was surprised by the sincerity of the apology. I accept your apology, she said simply. May I explain why I acted that way? Asked Sarah. Clara nodded. I've always protected Richard. When our parents died, I felt responsible for him. The marriage to Evelyn was difficult and he suffered a lot. When I saw he was interested in you, I was afraid he would get hurt again. I understand, said Clara gently. But my methods were terrible, Sarah continued. I based my suspicions on class prejudices, not on real evidence. And I almost destroyed something beautiful because of it. What's important is that we're all well now, replied Clara. You are very generous, Sarah smiled sadly. More generous than I deserved. Toby, who was on Clara's lap, chose that moment to stretch his little arms towards Sarah, as if wanting to comfort her. The gesture touched everyone. May I be part of your lives again? Asked Sarah hesitantly. You always have been, replied Richard, and Clara is generous enough to share our family with you. If you promise not to try to separate us again, added Clara with a smile. I promise, said Sarah solemnly. In fact, I want to help protect you. How so? There are still people making malicious comments about you, influential people in the capital. I can use my social position to defend you, to spread the truth about Clara's character. Richard and Clara exchanged surprised looks. You would do that? Asked Clara. It's the least I can do to make up for the trouble I caused. From that day on, Sarah became a valuable ally. She used her social influence to combat gossip about the marriage, spreading positive stories about Clara and the family's happiness. Gradually, social acceptance began to change. People began to see Clara not as an opportunistic maid, but as a woman who had earned her place through genuine qualities. Clara, in turn, proved herself an excellent manager of the house and a wonderful mother to Toby. She implemented improvements on the farm, always with Richard's approval, who valued her opinions. You have natural business instincts, observed Richard one afternoon, after Clara suggested changes in production that resulted in greater profit. I grew up watching how things work, she explained, and I've always had to be practical to survive. 1 year after the marriage, Clara discovered she was pregnant. The news filled the family with joy, especially Toby, who seemed to understand he would have a little brother or sister. Our family is growing, said Richard, hugging Clara with emotion. "And Toby is going to be a wonderful big brother," she added, looking at the boy playing on the floor. Clara's pregnancy was smooth and she continued caring for Toby and managing the house with the same dedication. Sarah became a regular visitor, helping with the preparations for the baby and forming a real bond with Clara. "I never thought I'd say this," Sarah confessed to Richard one day, "but Clara is the best thing that happened to this family." "I know," smiled Richard, "and you were wise enough to recognize it." The couple's second child, a girl they named Lily Ann, was born on a spring morning. Toby, now 2 years old, was fascinated by his little sister, insisting on helping Clara with all the care. "He'll be a natural protector," observed Richard, watching Toby make faces to make the baby smile. "Like his father," smiled Clara. The Harrison family became an example in the region. Richard and Clara proved that a marriage based on true love could overcome any social difference. Their property prospered, their children grew up happy, and their union grew stronger each day. Mrs. Martha, who had initially resisted the union, came to treat Clara like a daughter. She loved telling visitors how she had witnessed the miracle of that love which transformed the farm. "I've never seen a transformation like this," she would say proudly. "This house was sad and quiet. Now it's full of life and joy." A few years later, when Toby was 5 and Lily Ann 3, the family received an unexpected visit. Mr. Silas, the farmer who had employed Clara when she left Oakwood Manor, arrived with his wife to visit them. "We wanted to see how our former employee was doing," he said, smiling. "Though now you're the lady of this estate." "You will always be welcome here," Clara replied warmly. "You took me in during a difficult time." "And we knew how to give the right advice," laughed Mr. Silas. "I said you should fight for what made you happy." During dinner, Mr. Silas told stories about the time Clara worked for him, always emphasizing her dedication and honesty. "From the first day, we knew she was special," he said. "When that elegant man showed up looking for her, we were sure there was a great love story there." "And there certainly was," agreed Richard, holding Clara's hand. Toby and Lily Ann, now old enough to understand adult conversations, loved hearing the story of how their parents met and fell in love. "Daddy was foolish," declared Toby with the frankness of children. "Yes, he was," agreed Richard, laughing. "But Mommy was wise and forgave me. And now we are a happy family," finished Lily Ann. As the years passed, the story of the love between Richard and Clara became a local legend. Young couples came for advice, people in marital difficulties sought inspiration, and the farm became a symbol that true love overcomes any obstacle. Clara never forgot her humble origins. She established a small orphanage in the nearby town, giving opportunities to other children like she had been. Richard fully supported the project, seeing in it the natural generosity of his wife. "You're giving back to the world what you received," he observed, watching Clara teach reading to the children at the orphanage. "I'm sharing the happiness I found," she corrected. "No one should grow up without knowing it's possible to have a family that loves us." Toby and Lily Ann grew up understanding the value of compassion and social justice. They visited the orphanage with their mother, played with children from different backgrounds, and learned that a person's worth is not in their social position. "Our children will be better than us," said Richard one evening, watching Toby share his toys with a child from the orphanage. "They will have opportunities we didn't have," agreed Clara. "But most importantly, they will understand that everyone deserves love and respect." Sarah, who had become a loving and present aunt, often commented on Clara's wisdom. "You didn't just win a husband," she would say. "You transformed an entire family, an entire community." "Love has that power," Clara would reply simply. "When it's true, it spreads and touches everything around it." As Toby grew, it became clear he had inherited his mother's sensitivity and his father's determination. He showed a special interest in social issues, always asking why some people had more than others. "One day you'll understand that life isn't fair by nature," Clara explained, "but that we can work to make it fairer for everyone." Lily Ann, in turn, showed signs of inheriting her mother's practical intelligence. Even as a little girl, she watched how Clara managed the house and the farm, asking questions, that showed an early understanding of business. "This girl is going to be a born manager," prophesied Richard, watching his daughter methodically organize her toys. "Or perhaps a social reformer like her mother," suggested Sarah. "Her intelligence is impressive." During the evenings, when the children were asleep, Richard and Clara would often sit on the porch where it all began, reflecting on the journey that had brought them there. "Sometimes I still can't believe we're a family," Clara confessed. "Sometimes I can't either," agreed Richard. "Especially when I remember how I almost lost you because of my insecurity." "But you didn't lose me," Clara held his hand, "and now we're stronger because we went through that trial." "You taught me that true love is worth any struggle," said Richard. "And that real happiness comes from sharing life with the ones we love." Clara thought of all the children at St. Jude's home where she grew up, many of whom never had the chance to find a loving family. Her heart filled with gratitude for having found not only love, but also the opportunity to make a difference in the lives of others. "Richard," she said one night, "I have an idea to expand the home." "Tell me." "What if we created a vocational training program for the young people? We could teach trades, management, even advanced reading and writing." Richard smiled, admiring once again his wife's social vision. "That's a brilliant idea. You want to train people so they have real opportunities in life." "Exactly. Like I had when you trusted me to care for Toby, and like you had when you decided to fight for our love," Richard added. The program was implemented with great success. Young orphans received practical education that prepared them for adulthood. Many found decent jobs. Some even opened their own small businesses. "We're changing these children's futures," Clara observed with satisfaction, watching former orphans prosper in their new lives. The farm continued to prosper under the joint management of Richard and Clara. She brought practical innovations, and he provided traditional agricultural knowledge. Together, they created a model rural property that served as an example for other farmers. "You've proven that a marriage based on mutual respect and true love can be successful in every aspect," commented Dr. Arthur during a visit. "We've proven that prejudice is what keeps people from being happy," corrected Clara. "Love always finds a way when it's real." Toby, now 8 years old, often accompanied his parents in their social activities. He loved visiting the home and helping Clara with the younger children. "Mommy," he asked one day, "are all these children orphans like you were?" "Yes, my love. They don't have families to take care of them." "So we're their family here?" asked Toby with the simple logic of children. "Yes, we are," smiled Clara, "and you're like a big brother to them." Toby took this responsibility very seriously, always bringing toys to share and inventing games that included all the children. Lily Ann, now 6 years old, showed a special interest in the reading lessons Clara gave at the home. "Mommy, can I teach the letters to the little ones?" she asked. "Of course you can, my daughter. You already read very well." Seeing Lily Ann patiently helping younger children recognize letters filled Clara with pride. Her own daughters were learning the values of compassion and service that she considered fundamental. During a birthday celebration at the manor, Richard gave an emotional speech about the transformation Clara had brought to their lives. 10 years ago," he said before friends and employees, "this estate was prosperous, but it was empty of joy. Clara not only brought love to our family, she brought purpose to everything we do." "The purpose was always here," Clara replied when it was her turn to speak. "It just needed people united to fulfill it." The local community came to see the Harrison family as leaders not only economically but morally. They mediated disputes, helped families in difficulty, and always found ways to include the less fortunate in their initiatives. "You have transformed our region," said the town mayor during a public ceremony. "You have shown that individual prosperity must go hand in hand with social responsibility." Clara, always humble, deflected the praise to the community's joint work. "No one builds anything alone," she would say. "Our strength comes from working together for common goals." As the years passed, the love story between Richard and Clara inspired others to question prejudices and social conventions. Several unlikely marriages happened in the region, always citing the Harrisons' example. "You paved the way for other true loves," observed Sarah during a family gathering. "Love always finds a way," Clara philosophized. We just showed that it's worth fighting for." Toby, now a teenager, often asked his parents about the challenges they faced at the beginning of their marriage. "How did you know it would be worth fighting against so much opposition?" he asked one day. "Because we knew what we felt was real," explained Richard, "and because your mother taught me that true love is worth any sacrifice. And because your father taught me that trust, once broken, can be rebuilt if both parties make the effort," added Clara. Lily-Anne, always practical, asked her own question. "And what if it hadn't worked out? Would you have regretted trying?" Richard and Clara exchanged glances, considering the question seriously. "We never regret fighting for love," Clara said finally. "Even if it hadn't worked out, it would have been worth trying. Because it's better to try and fail than to never try and spend your life wondering, what if?" Richard completed. These family conversations became a tradition. Toby and Lily-Anne grew up understanding that relationships require work, courage, and above all, mutual respect. When Toby turned 18, he announced his intention to study law, with the goal of working to defend the rights of orphans and disadvantaged people. "I want to continue the work you started," he said, "but in a different way, using the laws to protect those in need." "We are very proud," said Clara, hugging her son. "You are going to make a difference in the world," added Richard. Lily-Anne, at 16, showed interest in farm management and agricultural innovation. She wanted to modernize the manor using techniques that would benefit both productivity and the workers. "The land can produce more if we treat the people who work on it well," she argued, echoing the values she had learned from her parents. "You have your mother's social vision and your father's commercial practicality," observed Sarah. "You are going to be an extraordinary leader." The orphanage founded by Clara became a respected institution throughout the state. Former students regularly returned to visit her, many now with their own families, always thanking her for the opportunity of education and love they had received. "You saved hundreds of lives," Richard said to Clara during one of these visits. "We saved," she corrected. "None of this would have been possible without your support. And none of it would have been necessary if you hadn't had the vision and compassion to see beyond our own happiness." As they grew older together, Richard and Clara became mentors to young couples in the community. They offered advice on how to build strong relationships based on mutual respect and understanding. "The secret," Clara would always say, "is to remember that love isn't just a feeling, it's a choice we make every day. And it's having the humility to ask for forgiveness when we're wrong, and the generosity to forgive when we're hurt," Richard would add. During the celebration of their 25th wedding anniversary, the family organized a big party at the manor. Hundreds of people came to celebrate, from close neighbors to former orphans Clara had helped educate. Toby, now a practicing lawyer, gave a moving speech about how his parents' love had inspired his vocation to defend the underprivileged. Lily-Anne, with a degree in agricultural management, announced her plans to implement a rural cooperative program that would benefit small farmers in the region. "Our family has always believed that individual prosperity must go hand in hand with social responsibility," she declared. "And we will continue to prove that." Sarah, now elderly but still active, insisted on speaking about her change of perspective. 25 years ago, I almost destroyed the most beautiful love I've ever witnessed because of foolish prejudices," she confessed publicly. "Clara and Richard taught me that a person's worth is not in their origin, but in their character." Clara, moved by the speeches, stood up to give thanks. "This party isn't just ours," she said. "It belongs to everyone who believed that love can overcome any difference, that kindness can defeat prejudice, and that together we can build a better world." Richard completed his wife's speech. Clara brought love to an empty house, purpose to a directionless life, and hope to an entire community. Our marriage was just the beginning of a transformation that continues to this day. The party lasted into the late hours, with music, dancing, and many stories being shared. Children from St. Jude's home performed a play telling the love story of Richard and Clara, drawing tears of emotion from everyone present. When they were finally alone on the porch, Richard and Clara reflected on the extraordinary journey they had traveled together. "Remember when you arrived here riding that donkey, carrying your bundles?" asked Richard, embracing his wife. "I remember," smiled Clara. I was so nervous, never imagining I was arriving at my true home. And I was so lost, trying to care for Toby alone, not knowing I was about to find not just help, but the love of my life. Two lonely hearts that found each other, Clara philosophized, and discovered that together they could build something much greater than they imagined. "And we're still building," said Richard, looking at the prosperous property, the social projects, the children who had become exemplary adults. "Forever," agreed Clara, sealing the promise with a tender kiss. End of story. Now tell us what you thought of this moving story of Richard and Clara. Do you believe true love can overcome any social difference? Leave your comment with your opinion, and don't forget to give your like to support our channel. If you liked this story, subscribe so you don't miss other touching narratives like this one.